Welcome back to The Deep Dive, where we don't just summarize sources, we really try to immerse ourselves in them to find the most potent and surprising truths.
And today, you are joining us for a deep dive into an absolutely extraordinary memoir.
The stack of material we have here reveals a setting so completely unique it almost defies belief. We are talking about a federal minimum security prison.
Right.
Existing side by side, sharing corridors, facilities, even sharing a cafeteria with the last U.S. national leprosarium.
It honestly sounds like a premise for speculative fiction, but it was the stark reality in Carville, Louisiana.
Yeah.
Our mission today is to follow the transformation of our narrator. He's a white-collar criminal, a man whose entire adult life was just built on this illusion of perfection, success, control.
And he's forced to confront that fragile self-worth when he's stripped of his identity.
And housed alongside the deepest outcasts of American society. I mean, people stripped of everything by a terrifying disease and really generations of crushing stigma.
Okay, so let's unpack this unusual geography. This is not just a prison next to a hospital. It's something else entirely.
It's an accidental commune, really, born of isolation.
We're talking about Carville, Louisiana.
Yeah.
And if you're picturing, the razor wire and concrete towers of a typical prison, you have to scrap that image right away. Carville was built on history and, frankly, on fear.
Its history is rooted completely in forced isolation. The institution was established on what was once an abandoned sugar plantation, Indian camp plantation.
Right.
It was leased by Louisiana way back in 1894, and it was formally designated as the Louisiana Leper Home.
And the location was chosen specifically because it was so remote.
Oh, virtually inaccessible.
Yeah.
There was no real road access, just this washed-out path. So you could only really get there by the Mississippi River or by train.
The remoteness wasn't just about geography, was it? It was ideological.
Absolutely. It was explicitly created to quarantine and hide away people who had what we now call Hansen's disease.
Huh.
One inmate, years later, described it really bitterly. He called Carville a human garbage dump for society's untouchables.
Wow.
And that isolation created this just astonishing mix of people. You had the federal convicts, the people who had failed society, economically or legally.
And they're sharing space with the patients who had failed only in the lottery of biology.
Exactly. And then you throw in the public health service staff. We're talking about the Sisters of Charity, Catholic monks, doctors, nurses.
People who actively chose to live within those halls to serve the afflicted.
The moral and social dynamics running through this one tiny slice of Louisiana are just mind-boggling. It's a place where the lines between the imprisoned and the free, the criminal and the innocent, the clean and the unclean just blurred completely.
So the narrator's first entrance, it perfectly sets up the central conflict of the memoir. This collision between his lifelong obsession with appearance and the raw, unadorned reality of imprisonment. He arrives fresh from his old life, trying to maintain some kind of veneer of control.
He literally arrives dressed for a better life. He's clutching this British khaki bag. It was a gift from his wife, Linda, which he had, carefully packed.
As if you were going to summer camp.
That's what he thought, like checking into a pleasant college dorm. It had things he considered essential for his routine.
Like shorts, T-shirts, 5 literary books, and a racquetball racket.
A racquetball racket. A clear symbol of his desire to maintain his affluent leisure class habits on the inside.
And that carefully constructed image is just shattered the moment he's processed. We get this excruciating, really visceral account of the strip search ritual.
Conducted by a guard con, the narrator is forced to stand completely naked, and he's just hyper-aware of his body, the saggy body, as he puts it, that he got from years of expense account dinners.
Right, the seafood appetizers, the fettuccine Alfredo, all that red wine.
And the ritual is just designed for absolute dehumanization. Khan is completely silent, methodical. The narrator follows the commands. Turn around, lift your arms, squat.
But the final command is the one that just destroys him.
Bend over and spread your cheeks. It's the final, irrevocable demand for absolute vulnerability. He notes that the humiliation wasn't even the nudity itself.
No.
It was the forced acknowledgement of his own physical flaws and weaknesses in front of this expressionless, completely uncaring authority figure.
And his immediate attempt to deflect, to sort of pull rank, based on his past reputation, it's so telling.
Oh, it's incredible. He desperately tries to inject his old identity into this sterile moment of processing. He says, I won the Dar Citizenship Award in high school.
In Khan's reaction.
He doesn't even blink. He just tells him, take your clothes and move it.
All those past accomplishments that defined his self-worth, they're irrelevant.
Completely. He's then given the prison uniform, horribly wrinkled, missing buttons, and his immediate, deeply ingrained impulse is to ask where he can find an iron.
He still believed, even then.
Even then. He believed that maintaining a perfect outward appearance would accurately reflect the quality of my work. He was desperate to project competence, even while serving time for, well, incompetence.
And that obsession with external image is the direct line to his financial downfall. He was a magazine publisher in Oxford, Mississippi.
Right, running the Oxford Times and then later this glossy Coast magazine. His entire professional life was just dedicated to crafting beautiful, aspirational surfaces.
He was a genuine perfectionist when it came to presentation, wasn't he?
He was obsessed. He spent years obsessing over his penmanship, even invented his own fonts for documents because he believed that neatness signaled quality and trustworthiness to his client.
And the irony is that this meticulous attention to detail was applied to the instruments of his crime.
Exactly.
So unpack the crime for us. We're talking about bank fraud through check kiting.
Check kiting is essentially floating money that you don't actually have. He would transfer checks between two different banks, let's call them Bank A and Bank B, to buy time.
Capitalizing on the lag in the system before the checks actually cleared.
Right. And he used that time, sometimes just a few crucial days, to keep his magazines running, paying for payroll, printing costs, overdue taxes, all while hoping to land a refinancing deal before the whole kite collapsed.
He didn't just casually print the documents either. He talks about how he would produce his fraudulent financial statements.
Oh, they were things of beauty, meticulously designed on advanced publishing software, printed on expensive cotton fiber stationery. He used this elegant, old-fashioned Baskerville font.
They didn't just look affluent. He said they smelled like affluence.
A perfect sensory illusion of success.
And that's the core tragedy of his offense, right? He wasn't stealing for a yacht or a fancy car.
No. The total loss across the two banks was substantial, about $750,000, yet he had nothing tangible to show for it, no personal wealth, just a pile of magazine inventory and debt.
An inmate later confronts him on this.
Yes, and calls him the stupidest damn criminal I ever met because he hadn't lined his own pockets. He was just feeding the ambition and the illusion of a failing enterprise. His real crime was allowing his desire to look like a success to completely destroy his life.
So once inside, you start to meet this cast of characters, and none are more immediately fascinating or morally ambiguous than his cellmate, Doc.
Victor Dombrowski. Yeah. Doc is this distinguished mid-50s intellectual man with both medical and pharmacy degrees.
Though his license is suspended everywhere except in Tennessee, where he went to school.
And the irony just keeps coming. He's a pharmacist locked up at a federal medical center, and because pharmaceutical companies assume he's still practicing, he gets over 60 free medical and pharmacy journals a month.
Addressed to Dr. Victor Dombrowski, Carville, L.A., and Doc's crime was far more lucrative and you could argue far more dangerous than the narrator's check kiting.
Oh, by a long shot. He was convicted of massive Medicaid fraud tied to his DNP-based heat pill weight loss clinics. The estimates of the loss run between $15 million and $37 million.
The DNP, or dinitrophenol. That's what makes his story so chilling.
It is. Doc had essentially created this highly profitable, highly dangerous fad. He'd found a footnote in some old Russian archives detailing how this chemical could elevate the body's basal metabolic rate, causing just rapid, astonishing weight loss.
Fat women loved it, he said.
It said it very dryly, yeah.
And this wasn't some new, untested compound. DNP was actually outlawed as a drug in 1938.
That's right, because it was recognized as incredibly toxic. It was known to cause cataracts and severe rashes, but the worst danger was in its thermogenic properties. It literally forces the body to burn fat and energy to produce heat.
And that heat production, if it's unchecked, is lethal.
It is. Doc himself tells the story of one Viennese physician who took an overdose and literally cooked to death from the inside out. But Doc had convinced himself that his heat pill was safe because he supplemented the DMP with various hormones.
Right. He claimed they controlled the patient's temperature to level off around 101 degrees, keeping them warm but not fatally overheating.
But here's where the moral compasses just diverge so sharply. You have to wonder about the depths of his greed.
He speculates on the dark potential of his invention.
He does. He realizes that his heat pill, which can elevate body temperature without any limit, could potentially be ramped up to 107 degrees.
A temperature he believed could kill the AIDS virus or treat certain cancer cells.
It's a stunning revelation. He has potentially world-changing medical knowledge, a genuine discovery that could save countless lives.
And he flatly refuses to share it. So how did the narrator, who's still, clinging to his own sense of ethical superiority despite his fraud conviction,
Mm.
how did he react to that level of cynicism? Isn't actively withholding a potential cure for greed a far greater moral failing?
Oh, absolutely. The narrator notes that Doc's commitment to self-interest was almost pure. Doc's response was simple. Why should he give away his intellectual property to the world when he could profit from it immensely when he got out?
He saw it as collateral.
Exactly. A way to rebuild his empire immediately. The narrator, despite his fraud, was driven by ambition and image. Doc was driven purely by capital. And that highlights the profound and, frankly, dangerous differences in motivation, even among white-collar criminals.
And then you have Link, who provides the ultimate contrast to Doc's intellectual high-stakes cynicism.
Yeah.
Link is pure, impulsive, slate crime, but with this absurd twist. This is the guy who nicknames the narrator Clark Kent and Bourne Motherfucker.
Link was a carjacker, but his methods and his motives were just hilariously specific. He admits to the narrator that he would hide in the bushes near Popeye's drive-thrus.
And he wasn't just waiting for late-model cars.
No, Mercedes or BMWs were the target, but he was waiting because he was motivated by getting the abandoned chicken.
He asked the narrator, seriously, you ever had Popeye's chicken? The immediate, delicious leftovers were a primary motivator for Grand Theft Auto.
It just underscores the low-level, immediate gratification nature of his criminal life compared to the narrator's complex, drawn-out financial scheme.
And the story of his near capture.
It cements the absurdity. He made a spontaneous decision to carjack a Little Debbie truck. He didn't realize it was a stick shift, which he couldn't drive properly.
So the truck starts fishtailing violently.
Zebra cakes, oatmeal pies, and cosmic brownies are just flying everywhere before he crashes into a streetcar pole.
The sheer ridiculousness of this criminal population, from the high-flying fraudster to the greedy doctor to the chicken-obsessed carjacker, all contained within the walls of a sanctuary for the medically exiled. It's just staggering.
It truly is.
Let's shift our focus to the other half of Carville now, the part that gives this place its profound moral gravity. The Hansen Disease patients. The historical baggage of the word leper means that most people, including the narrator when he first arrived, carry these deeply flawed, almost medieval ideas about the disease.
And we have to dispel those myths immediately. Hansen's disease is primarily a neurological disorder. It is not a disease that causes flesh to rot or body parts to just fall off, as the old myths claim.
The physical manifestations often come from secondary causes. The loss of fingers, toes, or limbs is usually due to amputation after an untreated infection.
Exactly. And why? Because the worst, most crippling symptom of Hansen's disease is nerve damage, leading to a total, complete loss of sensation, particularly in the extremities.
This is a crucial point for you to understand. If you can't feel pain, you can't protect yourself.
Patients hurt themselves constantly without knowing it. A minor cut that goes untended, a blister from walking, a burn from a stove element they just can't detect.
We hear about the couple, Stan and Sarah. They were blind, but also profoundly numb.
So numb that they couldn't even feel the communion wafer when Father Reynolds placed it in their palms. That inability to feel basic sensation highlights an extreme, constant vulnerability. The disease attacks the cooler parts of the body, the peripheral nerves in your extremities.
And there's this constant, terrifying uncertainty that fueled centuries of paranoia.
Still, even now, there's no vaccine, no test to predict susceptibility, and the exact manner of transmission is still scientifically unknown.
Though inhalation of an infected droplet is the primary fear.
It is, and that ambiguity is what allows the stigma to persist.
We also have the specific environmental link that's particularly relevant to Louisiana and Texas, where most of the indigenous U.S. cases originate.
The armadillo. It's one of the few other mammals that can naturally carry the bacteria, which adds this strange regional biological factor to the whole Carville story.
But the profound weight of the stigma is what truly crushed the patients. They often used aliases.
Stanley Stein, one of the most famous patients and activists, was actually born Sidney Levison. They took these false identities to protect their families from the public shame, which was considered hereditary, even though it's not.
And they had their own vocabulary to cope with that shame.
They did. They referred to the disease obliquely, calling it the package or the gazeek. They avoided the L word entirely.
This led to a huge campaign, spearheaded by the patients, to rename the condition to Hansen's disease.
After Dr. Gerhard Armauer Hansen, the scientist who discovered the bacterium, they even published a famous magazine called The Star.
With the slogan, radiating the light of truth on Hansen's disease.
But the campaign ultimately failed because the public just refused to cooperate. When people eventually learned that Hansen's disease was leprosy, they felt duped.
So the intense stigma just transferred to the new name.
They just couldn't escape the historical condemnation.
The stories of forced confinement are just gut-wrenching, and Ella Bounds' history provides the tragic details.
She was a schoolgirl in 1926 when a doctor noticed oval spots on her leg. He confirmed the diagnosis by pricking them, and she felt absolutely nothing.
And the state of Louisiana employed drivers, sometimes called bounty hunters by the patients,
Who were paid $10 per delivery to transport afflicted individuals to Carville. A white man drove up in a truck with a large hand-painted quarantine sign nailed conspicuously to the back.
Just imagine that scene, seeing that truck arrive for you.
Ella's father, however, managed to secure 3 final days for a farewell feast, trying to give his daughter one last taste of a normal life.
And he had a driver to the colony gate himself.
She was given a burlap sack for her possessions, including her yellow Sunday dress. Once she passed through those gates, she was just gone from the world. A total erasure, simply for having the wrong set of nerve cells.
But inside, there was also incredible grace and dedication. We have to acknowledge the Sisters of Charity, the nuns who served there.
Yes, they offered not just physical care, but spiritual comfort. They refused to use the term leper. They chose instead to call the patients my friends.
That simple linguistic choice was a monumental act of dignity.
It really was. And we have to talk about the medical giants, like Dr. Paul Brand, who revolutionized the treatment of the disease, shifting the focus from amputation to restoration.
He treated the patients with this almost sacred respect.
He did. He described how he would touch their damaged feet as if he were handling a delicate but broken instrument.
Dr. Brand's surgeries were groundbreaking. He often restored functionality to nerve-damaged hands and feet, which allowed patients to interact with the world again. But here is the profound irony of their societal exile.
His success sometimes caused unintended financial hardship.
Exactly. Why would successful medical intervention lead to poverty?
Because for decades, begging was often the patient's only reliable source of income. They would display their disfigured, often bandaged hands or stumps to solicit alms.
With corrected, functional hands, their ability to collect charity was greatly diminished because they no longer appeared sufficiently pitiable.
That detail is just so sobering. It reminds you how utterly society had abandoned them, forcing them into a financial economy based on pity and visible suffering.
And this brings us to the profound nature of Carville as a sanctuary, the choice of imprisonment.
Right. By the late 1950s, modern medications were available to control the disease, and the gates of Carville were officially opened. Patients were free to leave.
You would expect a mass exodus, right?
You would. But the memoir reveals that out of 297 patients living there at the time, 281 remained 1 year later.
People like Ella and Harry, who had been brought there against their will, chose to stay.
And the narrator, watching them, comes to this difficult conclusion. Freedom was more terrifying than imprisonment?
Because the stigma waiting outside the gates was just unrelenting.
Inside Carville, they were safe from the world's fear, ridicule, and judgment. They were home.
We get a powerful example of this in the story of Jimmy Harris. He was cured by an experimental fever treatment that raised his body temperature above 105 degrees.
He was released, and he became a successful professional photographer in Ville Platte.
And the remarkable thing is that most people in his town knew his history.
And it didn't hurt his business. He found a pocket of acceptance. However, he later returned to Carville as an outpatient when his wife needed treatment.
And he revealed that any former patient who had been forced to come to Carville could return to live there free of cost.
It was their subsidized home, their safe harbor, protected by the federal government from the fear of the public.
So life inside this dual facility, it created a truly bizarre internal reality. A strange friction between the regimented world of the federal prison and the quiet, long-term existence of the colony.
The inmates immediately established their own economy, and food was the central currency.
In particular, fruit, which was reserved for the patients in the PHS kitchens. That became immensely valuable contraband.
Lemons, bananas, oranges, things you and I think of as basic staples, could fetch up to $5 each from the more affluent inmates.
And the contraband list was strangely mundane. Tape, razors, and cologne.
The narrator, still desperately trying to cling to his former identity, learned to tear out the aromatic inserts from magazines like GQ and Esquire.
So he could rub the fragrance onto his drab green uniform before visits.
Determined to be, as he put it, the best-smelling inmate at Carville.
His assigned job was low status and low pay. 6 days a week for 14 cents an hour, washing dishes and writing the daily menu boards.
But here is where his pathological obsession with detail, which destroyed him on the outside, begins to manifest in a different, really genuine way.
He excelled as the garnish man.
This is a beautiful piece of irony. His skill with creating illusions, his perfect fraudulent financial statements, is now applied to creating ephemeral, beautiful works of art from fruit for the patients.
It was an exacting, painstaking process. He had to check out a numbered paring knife from a double-locked closet, treat it almost like a surgical instrument.
And use it to carve swans from honeydew melons, ducks from lemons with these intricately notched carrot slice feet, and island scenes using potato sand and pepper palm branches.
His financial statements were deceptive works of art. His fruit carvings were genuine works of service.
And the patients, the most visually perceptive of the residents, they loved them. They would crowd around the cafeteria line just to see his new creation.
And the difference is profound. His outside art was done to impress financiers and elevate his own image.
His inside art was done simply to provide a small, unexpected moment of beauty for people who desperately needed it. It was a skill shifting from self-promotion to actual contribution.
Meanwhile, the inmate social structure was dominated by those who managed to retain their external wealth.
Led by Steve Reed, the wealthy entrepreneur serving 4 years for money laundering, Link, the carjacker, called him Richie Rich.
And Steve used his retained assets to great effect. He essentially hired an entire entourage of inmates, a chef, a maid, a barber.
Even a personal trainer? All to serve him. And his social scene revolved around these invitation-only Friday game nights, which were hyper-competitive, high-stakes Monopoly games.
It's the ultimate picture of arrested development. Former executives, now forbidden from having real money, playing Monopoly.
And Steve, dominating the game, was hyperactive, quickly moving pieces and stacking the odds, believing his external financial dominance should translate directly to prison game night.
The narrator, desperate for any small victory after his colossal public failure, felt humiliated by this petty competition.
So he turns for help against this arrogant entrepreneur to, well, perhaps the most dangerous strategist in the prison.
Art Levin, a mob lawyer.
Represented New Orleans' top mafia boss and was writing a book about his criminal life. Levin is the calm, calculating force.
The narrator asks him how to beat Steve.
And Levin advises him to systematically buy the railroads, a strategy Steve immediately mocks as outdated. But Levin, knowing the stakes for the narrator's psychological well-being, does more than advise.
He steps in to cheat on the narrator's behalf.
He does. He notices Steve Reed is stacking the chance cards, specifically the take a walk on the boardwalk card, which always benefited Steve. So Levin meticulously tracks the game's progress, ensuring the dice fall correctly or pieces land strategically, guaranteeing the narrator's victory.
The irony is rich. A celebrated white-collar criminal, the narrator, has to rely on a mob lawyer to teach him how to properly, ruthlessly cheat a fellow wealthy criminal at a board game.
Levin bankrupts Steve Reed, calling it simply a little insurance for the narrator. It's a perfect microcosm of the corrupt business world that put them all there.
Initially, the narrator views his time as a journalistic opportunity. He's planning a sort of George Plimpton-esque undercover expose on the convicts and the patients.
And he finds incredible material. Frank Regano, Jimmy Hoffa's former lawyer, is there,
claiming he unwittingly delivered the message to kill JFK.
Link, the carjacker, instantly views his story as a commodity and demands $1 million to be included. The inmates immediately saw their personal failings as a path to financial gain.
But his own perspective is already beginning to shift, subtly pushed by the patients.
We mentioned his menu board illustrations, President Clinton skewering a pig for the BBQ pork meal. They're now done purely for the enjoyment of the patients, just providing a little entertainment in their constrained lives.
The profound change comes in that small, excruciating moment with Stan and Sarah, the blind, numb couple. They're disoriented in the cafeteria, nearly walking into a coat closet. The narrator, trying to be helpful, trying to demonstrate his kindness and virtue, gently grips Stan's arm to guide him.
And that moment, that simple, well-intentioned act of touch, is immediately rejected.
Stan just snaps, "Don't touch me, we don't want your help." The narrator is instantly humiliated.
He was trying to be the virtuous savior, and he was rejected not for his past crime, but for his touch.
He realizes with a crushing weight exactly what the patients must feel every single time an outsider recoils from them.
He, the man obsessed with being untouchable, professionally untouchable, socially untouchable, suddenly experienced the raw, absolute fear of his own physical presence, the fear of contamination that defined the patients' lives.
And this pushes him from observational journalism to true service.
It does. He volunteers to teach GED classes, looking for a way to genuinely help. And he discovers the inmates' biggest shared practical concern:
How to account for the massive gap on their resumes when they get out.
the creative suggestions from the inmates for hiding their prison time were a masterclass in image creation. One suggested putting down the facility's actual formal name, Chef Gillis W. Long Hansen's Disease Center.
Knowing that any potential employer would just assume they were working at a medical center or a hospital, never suspecting a minimum security prison.
They were still using every ounce of ingenuity to perpetuate a lie.
But the narrator discovers the true depth of the challenge isn't about job placement, it's about fundamental knowledge.
Yeah, when he encourages questions, an older inmate named Mr. Dingham raises his hand and asks, "I've always wondered, what's a vowel?"
Wow.
This forces the narrator to realize that real help means starting at the absolute terrifying basics, dealing with the essence of their ignorance, not just the surface problem of their resumes.
And while we're on the subject of fundamental moral gaps, we had to revisit Jefferson, the former postal worker and counterfeiter.
His conviction was for money order fraud, but he reveals his far more lucrative, untraceable crime: stealing cash from the mail.
Jefferson manned the X-ray machine at the post office.
And he explained that cash, especially paper money bundled inside envelopes, stands out like you do in prison. He stole over $40,000 in cash, almost entirely from birthday, holiday, and graduation cards.
And the detail that is so sickening is his willingness to read the personal notes before taking the money.
He describes reading a birthday card for a 5-year-old, noting the relative had given the child $100 for every year he'd been alive. Jefferson then swiped $500 from a 5-year-old's birthday card.
And the dark, twisted punchline is that he was never caught for this far more morally reprehensible crime, only for the money orders.
And he plans to use his ill-gotten, untraceable gains to open a legitimate mailboxes, etc. franchise upon his release,
completing the circle of using crime to fund the veneer of respectability.
As the narrator begins to find a genuine purpose in helping others inside Carville, his external life just collapses completely.
His wife, Linda, files for divorce. She was finished with the cycle of apologies and, more critically, his relentless obsession with maintaining the illusion of perfection, even with a felony conviction hanging over him.
The news of the divorce triggers a horrific, symbolic nightmare. He dreams he's on a broken rope bridge. His children are screaming for help, falling away into the darkness.
And he is suddenly blinded, utterly unable to reach or save them. The screams just fall away into silence.
That dream is the complete psychological expression of his guilt. He realized that his obsession with his own image and business success had blinded him to the real damage he was inflicting on the people he loved, leading to his ultimate failure as a husband and a father.
This emotional devastation leads to his physical breakdown. He's in the empty patient cafeteria at 4 a.m, just crying until he chokes, his face covered in red blotches and tears.
He tries to hide when Ella Bounds, the elderly patient who had lived there since 1926, arrives for her early coffee.
And Ella, who has endured a lifetime of hardship, is the perfect witness to his unmasking.
She tells him simply to sit down. She offers comfort without judgment, without comparing her decades of suffering to his relatively short, self-inflicted prison sentence. She reaches for his hand and holds it.
He notes that her skin felt cool and smooth, and her hands smelled like flowers.
Which is so profound, considering the fear of touch and the physical manifestations of her disease. She just sits with him in silent vigil.
It is in this moment of absolute vulnerability, with Ella holding his hand, that the narrator finally confesses his lifelong burden.
His need to impress others and maintain the illusion of perfection, the desperate need for applause that drove him to fraud.
And Ella's response is immediate, simple, and foundationally transformative. She looks at this broken, shamed man and says,
"Well, you ain't got to worry about that no more."
The relief was immediate. His worst secret, his ultimate shame, was now public and shared with someone who had survived true exile.
The image he had spent his life constructing had finally shattered, and he was physically, emotionally safe in the presence of an outcast. The freedom in that destruction was immense.
And this leads to the core wisdom he needed to rebuild. He worried desperately about facing people in Oxford, the town where he failed so spectacularly and was publicly disgraced.
He asked Ella how he could possibly face them.
And Ella's advice is simple, yet completely revolutionary for a man whose identity was based on external validation.
What people's think ain't none of your business.
For a person who had spent his entire adult life tracking approval ratings, seeking accolades, and adjusting his behavior based on perceived public admiration, this was a philosophical earthquake.
Ella, who had lived her entire life labeled and shunned, could not afford to care what the outside world thought. Her dignity had to exist internally. She taught him how to internalize his self-worth.
The final, poignant lesson that cements this transformation comes from Ella's Coke bottle story.
She explained that in the early days of Carville, the Coca-Cola distributor from Baton Rouge refused to accept returnable bottles from the colony.
Why?
Because he feared a massive public boycott if customers learned the glass bottles had been handled or touched by lepers.
So instead, the distributor sent them only chipped and cracked bottles, bottles that were considered unreturnable, essentially disposable.
That is heartbreaking. That a major corporation would inflict that microaggression on people who were already suffering extreme isolation, all driven by public fear of a harmless glass bottle. This story provides the perfect metaphor for the narrator's self-acceptance. He realized he didn't need to be a new person. He was still the same man with the same meticulous skills that produce both fraud and fruit carvings.
But he needed a new purpose.
The challenge was to take the chipped and cracked essence of himself, his felony conviction, his debt, his failure hide nothing, and find a purpose in simple, helpful acts, just as Ella had managed to turn her disease and her forced isolation into a source of sacred kindness and dignity.
As the narrator's time in Carville nears its end, the delicate balance of the dual institution just collapses under the weight of overcrowding.
Right. Doc manages to intercept a Bureau of Prisons memo showing Carville is 99% over capacity.
The place was never intended to be a maximum security facility, and the overcrowding led to rising tensions and an escalating cycle of violence.
We hear details of inmates planning to use prosthetic legs and padlocks and tube socks as improvised weapons. The security was a joke, made worse by the sheer number of inmates packed into the space.
The breaking point was tragic. The fatal stabbing of John Gray, a 58-year-old inmate. He was killed by Juan, a wheelchair-bound Mexican inmate, over a dispute involving a TV channel change and a coughing fit.
Juan, the paraplegic, had a homemade shank. John Gray died of a massive heart attack 4 days later, though the prison initially tried to minimize the connection to the stabbing.
The FBI had to be called in.
And the guards lost all control trying to secure the corridors.
This tragedy, combined with the extreme security breaches, like the one where an inmate named Smeltzer was routinely smuggling in muffalettas for 40 inmates.
Proving that keeping out guns or drugs was virtually impossible.
It forced the Bureau of Prisons to intervene decisively.
The inmate side of the facility was shut down. Those with less than 6 months remaining, including the narrator, were eligible for release or a halfway house placement.
And the patients, who had endured this chaotic intrusion, were overjoyed, finally regaining full control of their quiet home.
The parting shots of the convicts are true to form. Link, being hauled away, confessed he'd spent his recent furlough looking for women, crack, and a limousine. The inmates had been a chaotic, selfish intrusion into the patient's carefully constructed sanctuary.
The narrator gets a 5-day furlough just before his final release. He uses this time for his final farewells, and in a moment that truly demonstrates his transformation, he finally reaches out to Harry, one of the older patients.
And holds his disfigured hand.
He notes that Harry's hand felt like a unique, broken, beautiful sculpture. For the first time, the narrator sees the disfigurement not as a source of revulsion or fear, but as a testament to resilience and unique character.
He tells Harry he was honored to be his friend.
He says goodbye to Ella, who assures him, "I'll see you in the breeze."
The narrator leaves Carville with just 2 cardboard boxes of possessions, massive debt, a felony conviction, no job, and a broken marriage, but with an entirely new internal architecture.
Meanwhile, the patients celebrate their regained freedom. 6 months after the narrator's release, Carville commemorated its centennial in 1994.
celebrating 100 years of the leprosarium and, critically, the exodus of the inmates. The celebration included a Mardi Gras parade featuring a tombstone float, which the remaining patients wildly cheered for, celebrating the death of their prison tenants.
Sadly, the community didn't last much longer.
No, the Public Health Service closed operations in 1999. The remaining patients were relocated either to a nondescript hospital wing in Baton Rouge or offered a $33,000 annual stipend to try and live independently in a world that still feared them.
And Ella Bounds died in 1998, buried in an unmarked grave outside Abita Springs.
The legacy, however, is preserved. Jimmy Harris's self-published book, King of the Microbes, chronicled their lives. And in 2000, the National Hansen's Disease Museum was established at Carville to preserve the unique history of this sanctuary.
The narrator left Carville with nothing materially. He lost his status, his money, his marriage.
But he found a renewed, simple purpose: to build a quiet life of honesty and simplicity with his children in Oxford, Mississippi.
He had spent his sentence in a place literally constructed for society's most stigmatized people, the medically and socially untouchable. Yet his great realization was that he was the one who had spent a lifetime building his own far more restrictive prison.
A prison constructed of outward image, desperate ambition, and the relentless hunger for public approval.
The people who had been legally quarantined provided him with the freedom of radical self-acceptance.
They taught him that what other people think truly isn't his business.
So here is the provocative thought for you to carry forward. Our narrator had to be physically imprisoned in the company of the world's most outwardly flawed to gain the freedom of radical self-acceptance. We all construct prisons built on expectations and appearances. Given the choice, do we stay in the certain, comfortable prison we build for ourselves, the prison of image and expectation? Or do we step into the frightening, unscripted freedom where our true, flawed character is exposed? Something to mull over until our next deep dive.